Rachel had always had a soft spot for animals, at least that's what she said. A few months ago, she started volunteering at a local animal shelter 2 or 3 nights a week. She claimed it was her way of giving back, said the work helped her decompress, find peace. And at first, Matthew admired it. He even felt a little proud, telling friends at work how his wife was out walking rescue dogs and cleaning kennels, while others scrolled through their phones all evening. But over time, something felt off. It began subtly. Rachel would come home later than usual, always after dark, her hair a little tousled, her makeup looking too perfect for a place filled with matted fur and disinfectant. When Matthew asked how the dogs were doing, she'd smile and say something generic like, "So many sweet ones, I wish we could bring them all home." She never mentioned a single name. No favorite pup. No story about a funny adoption or a stubborn mutt. Just vague affection and tired eyes. Then there was her phone. Rachel used to leave it on the kitchen counter without a second thought. Lately, it never left her side. She'd glance at it during dinner, screen always face down. A few times, Matthew caught her swiping notifications away just a little too quickly. Once, around 11:30 p.m., he woke up to find the bed empty. She was downstairs, murmuring into her phone in the living room. When he walked in, she said it was her friend Paula asking for advice about a breakup. Paula, the friend who moved to Portland last year? Matthew didn't say anything then. Didn't want to be that guy. Jealous, paranoid, controlling. He told himself it was nothing. Maybe she really had found a sense of purpose at the shelter. Maybe the glow she came home with some nights was just from helping animals find homes. But the seeds of doubt had been planted. One night he noticed a small patch of her wrist was red, like it had been rubbed raw. "Oh, one of the dogs got a little too excited on the leash," she explained quickly. But the mark looked more like it had been made by friction, not teeth or claws. And her hands? Too soft. No nicks or scratches, no chipped polish. They didn't look like the hands of someone who spent evenings scrubbing kennels. Still, Matthew didn't confront her. He paid attention. He started noting the times she left and returned, made mental notes of her outfits, watched how she smiled at her phone, how she suddenly had new lingerie, but wore it on days she said she'd be with the animals. And one Thursday afternoon, with a pit in his stomach, Matthew made a decision. He stopped by the shelter, armed with her favorite iced coffee and a bag of muffins from the place she loved. Just a small surprise for his kind-hearted wife. But what he found, or rather, didn't find, would change everything. Matthew had replayed the scene in his head all morning. Rachel's laugh the night before, light and airy as she tossed her purse over her shoulder and kissed him goodbye. "Wish me luck," she said, grabbing her volunteer lanyard off the kitchen hook. "They're short-staffed tonight. I might have to clean out the big kennels." He smiled, nodded, and told her to be safe. But as the door closed, a shadow lingered in the room. A thought had grown heavy in his chest these last few weeks, too persistent to ignore now. Something wasn't right. He could feel it. Not just in his gut, but in the silence that followed her departures, in the way she had stopped mentioning the shelter's staff, or even the animals. So today he decided to follow the whisper of doubt. He called in a personal day, picked up her favorite iced caramel macchiato, and drove across town to the shelter, half excited to surprise her, half terrified he wouldn't find her there. The shelter was smaller than he imagined. A chain-link fence surrounded the main building, and colorful banners hung in the windows. Adopt, don't shop, and Forever Homes Needed. Inside, the receptionist greeted him warmly, her expression brightening at the sight of the coffee in his hand. "Looking to volunteer?" she asked, motioning to a clipboard. Matthew chuckled and shook his head. "No, I'm just here to surprise my wife, Rachel Parker. She's been volunteering here for a while now. I thought I'd bring her a little treat during her shift." The receptionist paused, her brows lifting. "Rachel Parker?" She tapped at the computer, then frowned. "I don't think we've seen her in maybe a month? Let me double-check." She clicked a few more times, then turned the screen slightly toward him as if to soften the blow. "Last sign-in was 5 weeks ago. I remember her, really sweet, helped with the morning feeds. But she hasn't been around lately." Matthew blinked, unsure whether he heard her right. "Are you sure?" "She said she was coming here just last night." The receptionist nodded. "I'm sure. Maybe she's volunteering somewhere else now, but here? No, not recently. The words echoed. Not recently. Matthew muttered a thank you, left the coffee on the counter, and walked out with his pulse thudding in his ears. The sky, which had looked so blue earlier, now felt leaden. His fingers trembled slightly as he unlocked his car. He didn't want to believe it, not really, but he couldn't deny what he'd just heard. He didn't go home. Instead, he drove aimlessly for half an hour, Rachel's voice bouncing around his memory. It's all just about the animals, Matt. It's not glamorous, but it feels good to do something that matters. He had clung to that voice, that image of her, hair tied back, sleeves rolled, a woman doing good for the world. But now that image was cracking, fast. He parked across from a café she used to love, an old-world corner spot with ivy crawling along its windows and outdoor tables shaded by green umbrellas. He sat there in his car for a while, not sure what he was waiting for, until he saw her. Rachel. Same tousled hair, same relaxed confidence in her step. No uniform, no volunteer ID. She was smiling. She didn't look tired like she did when she came home from volunteering. She looked radiant, energized. And she wasn't alone. A man sat at one of the tables, waiting for her. Matthew recognized him immediately, tall, neatly dressed, a face he had only seen in passing once at a neighborhood wine-tasting event. His name came back to him like a whisper. Eli. Rachel leaned down, kissed Eli on the cheek, and then sat across from him. They were close, bodies angled inward, the kind of posture that says more than any words. And then she did it. Reached across the table, placed her hand over his, fingers lacing for a moment that stretched too long to be platonic. Matthew didn't move, didn't breathe. The coffee cup in his hand had gone lukewarm. His heart wasn't racing. It had stopped altogether. He watched them for 15 full minutes. Laughter, hands, smiles, all the warmth she used to bring home, the light she claimed to have gathered from doing good deeds. It was here, with him, with Eli. It wasn't a one-time slip. This was routine, familiar, carefully planned. She hadn't been walking dogs or cleaning cages. She'd been feeding something else entirely, her own hunger for connection, for someone new. And she'd cloaked it all in kindness, assuming the shelter would make the perfect cover. Matthew didn't confront them, not yet. He waited until Rachel leaned in again, her hand brushing Eli's cheek. Then he turned the key in the ignition and drove off. Not in a rage, not in tears, but with a clear, steady mind, because now he knew, and the next move would be his. The drive home was quieter than usual, not because the road was empty, but because Matthew couldn't hear anything beyond the echo of what he'd seen. Rachel's laugh, the warmth in her gaze, the way her fingers curled over Eli's hand like they had done it 100 times before. It looped in his mind, each moment more vivid than the last. He didn't grip the steering wheel tighter. He didn't scream or cry. He just drove, not away from the betrayal, but into the stillness he knew he needed to make his next move count. He didn't call her, didn't text. That evening, when Rachel walked through the door with her usual sigh and soft smile, Matthew was already seated at the kitchen island. His face gave nothing away. "Hey," she said, hanging her purse on the hook, her tone as breezy as ever. "Today was something. I swear, the new rescue dogs are even messier than the last batch. I might still have fur in my bra." She laughed and made a beeline for the fridge. Matthew didn't laugh with her. He watched. Every move, every false beat in her story was like watching a play you'd already read the script for. "Rough day?" he asked, keeping his voice calm, measured, almost detached. Rachel pulled out a bottle of wine and turned to face him, leaning against the counter. "Rough, but rewarding," she replied, twisting the corkscrew like she was used to doing this performance. "You wouldn't believe the conditions some of these poor animals come in. Just breaks your heart." He tilted his head, feigning interest. "Did the shelter get any new staff recently?" She paused just slightly, then shook her head. "Nope. Still just me, Marcy, and Jenna most nights." "Why?" Matthew let the silence stretch for a moment. "Just wondering," he said, his gaze holding hers a beat too long. Rachel's eyes flickered. She poured herself a glass of wine, took a sip, then changed the subject quickly, asking if he wanted to order Thai for dinner. But Matthew wasn't listening. His mind had already moved past this version of her, the one who smiled so easily while lying. The next day he prepared. He knew where they met. He knew the pattern now. Thursdays, late afternoons, the café, that cozy little corner where secrets were traded under umbrellas and espresso steam. This time he dressed differently. No rushed hair, no old hoodie. He wore a dark coat, neutral jeans, the kind of outfit that blended in. Not to intimidate, but to observe without being seen. He arrived 15 minutes before her, ordered a black coffee, sat inside near the window, his view perfectly aligned with their usual table outside, and then, right on time, there she was. Rachel. Her coat swaying open to reveal the same soft green blouse she used to wear on their date nights. The blouse, she once said, made her feel beautiful. Eli was already waiting, scrolling his phone. He stood when she arrived, kissed her cheek. Matthew didn't feel the sting of jealousy anymore. What he felt was finality. They talked, laughed. Rachel tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and leaned in like he was telling her a secret that made her feel young again. Then she did it, the hand on his. The pause, that intimate, unspoken touch. Matthew stood, coffee in hand, and made his way outside. He didn't rush, he didn't cause a scene. His steps were slow, deliberate, the kind of pace you'd expect from someone walking into the final chapter of a book they never wanted to read. When Rachel noticed him, her body stiffened immediately. Her smile vanished, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. Eli followed her gaze, his hand retracting slowly like it had been caught in a trap. Matthew said nothing at first. He placed the untouched coffee in front of Rachel, the condensation still clinging to the cup. Then, with perfect clarity, he looked her in the eye. "I hope the dogs are doing okay." The words landed like a quiet explosion. Rachel's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Her fingers trembled around the coffee cup, and Eli sat frozen, as if unsure whether to speak or disappear entirely. Matthew didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked away, each step deliberate, his back straight. No yelling, no accusations, just truth, delivered with precision. He left her sitting there, unraveling in slow motion. Back at home, he packed, quietly. He didn't leave a note. He didn't need to. The moment at the café had said everything. He took only what was his clothes, books, his camera gear. The rest he left behind, like remnants of a life built on trust that no longer existed. Later that evening, he sent a single message to a mutual friend, a simple group text with no bitterness, no drama. "Rachel and I are no longer together. I'll let her share the details she feels comfortable with." Within hours, word spread. The narrative cracked, then shattered. Friends asked questions. Family members called, unsure what to believe. Rachel, once admired for her compassion, now had no answer that could patch the damage. And Eli? He disappeared. Whether out of guilt or fear, no one heard from him again. Matthew didn't feel victorious. He didn't want revenge. What he wanted, what he needed, was to stand up for the version of himself that believed, that trusted, that gave his heart honestly. That version had been betrayed, but this new version... He was wide awake. The days that followed felt eerily quiet, not just in Matthew's apartment, but inside his own mind. There were no more phantom phone buzzes, no waiting up to hear keys in the door, no pretending not to notice that Rachel had been lying. Everything had collapsed, but oddly it didn't feel like chaos. It felt like a vacuum, the absence of love, the end of noise. Rachel called, twice, then 3 times. Each one went unanswered. Matthew had nothing left to say. The moment at the café had been his final act of presence. Anything beyond that would only give her the dignity of conversation, and she hadn't earned that yet. Instead, he focused on practicalities. He changed the locks on the old house within days, not out of malice, but necessity. She still had a key, and he had no intention of waking up to the sight of her packing in silence, pretending it was all just a dream gone wrong. He canceled their shared streaming accounts, disconnected her from their joint bank card, and updated his emergency contacts at work. The process was mechanical, but it helped anchor him in a reality that still felt surreal. Mutual friends began reaching out. Some were cautious, clearly unsure which version of the story was safe to believe. Others were bolder. His best friend Alex sent a one-word text, "Unreal," followed by, "You okay?" Matthew appreciated the simplicity. No prying, no judgment, just the quiet recognition that a man who once thought he had it all had been brought to his knees by betrayal wrapped in affection. He didn't respond right away. It was strange how, despite all the deceit, Matthew didn't hate Rachel. He resented her choices, yes. He mourned the trust she had violated, but hatred? That would have required energy he no longer wanted to give her. What he felt instead was a deeper ache, a sorrow for the years spent building something with someone who had been quietly chiseling cracks into its foundation. Rachel tried once more, this time through email. The subject line read, "Please, just read," and against his better judgment, Matthew did. In the email, she admitted she had lost sight of things. She said Ely was a mistake, that the shelter lie had begun as a small excuse to get space, but quickly spiraled into something more permanent. She wrote about guilt, about confusion, about still loving Matthew, not in a romantic way anymore, but as someone I've shared a life with. That line stung the most, not the loss of romance, but the audacity to redefine what they'd shared as if her betrayal could be reframed into something noble. Matthew didn't reply. He didn't need to. He knew she wasn't writing to win him back. She was writing to cleanse her own conscience, to unburden herself so she could walk forward with less weight on her shoulders, even if it meant leaving all of that weight behind in his hands. The real fallout, though, didn't come from Rachel. It came from the people around them. His mother, who had always adored Rachel, called him with a trembling voice. "She always fooled me," she said softly, as if admitting guilt for not seeing the signs. "But I'm glad you didn't let it fester." His sister was far less forgiving. "She played saint for years, volunteering my ass. She wanted applause for being decent while she hid the mess behind the curtain." Rachel's social circle reacted too. Once known for her warmth, her kindness, and that ever-present willingness to help with neighborhood fundraisers, she now faced whispers, narrowed eyes, and the unrelenting frost of polite distance. She had underestimated how tightly knit their community was. People talked, and Matthew had said nothing, which, ironically, spoke volumes. His silence made others pay closer attention to her behavior, and soon enough, Rachel's carefully polished image began to chip. As for Ely, he vanished like smoke. The man who had once laughed over cappuccinos with Rachel, who held her hand in broad daylight without a second thought, now became unreachable. Word spread that he'd taken a job offer out of state. Some said he moved to Denver, others said Boston. Wherever he went, he left without so much as a goodbye to the life he tried to steal a piece of. Rachel, it seemed, was left to deal with the consequences alone. Matthew didn't date. Not yet. He wasn't trying to move on in the way people expected, jumping into distractions, making impulsive changes, or rediscovering his wild side. Instead, he reconnected with himself. He dusted off his old camera and started shooting again, not for work, not for anyone else's Instagram feed, but for the way sunlight hit rusted fences, or how fog lingered between trees in early morning. He found peace in the quiet, a different kind of peace than what Rachel had claimed to find. He didn't need to forgive her. He didn't even need to forget. What he needed, and had now, was clarity. The fallout had cleared the air, exposed the rot beneath the surface, and in doing so gave him a chance to rebuild. Not the marriage, not the past, himself. 3 months had passed since Matthew walked away from the café, leaving behind a relationship that once defined his world. In that short stretch of time, everything had shifted, not in loud, dramatic ways, but in quieter, more permanent ones. His home was different now, not just because her shoes were gone from the entryway or the perfume no longer lingered in the bathroom. The air itself had changed. Lighter, cleaner, honest. He had always assumed that healing came in waves, dramatic, obvious ones. But what he discovered instead was something subtler. Healing looked like drinking coffee in silence and realizing you weren't waiting for someone to walk in. It sounded like the absence of tension. It felt like rediscovering the weight of your own footsteps when you're no longer chasing shadows. Rachel never tried again. After her email went unanswered, she stopped reaching out. Whether it was shame, acceptance, or the realization that her words couldn't erase the damage she had caused, Matthew didn't know. And he didn't care to ask. He wasn't angry anymore. In fact, some days he didn't think about her at all, and when he did, it was like recalling a novel you once read and closed, not quite regretting it, but knowing you'd never revisit those pages. What lingered more than her memory was the clarity she had accidentally gifted him. Her betrayal stripped away the illusions, and what remained was a man who now knew his worth wasn't tied to someone else's approval or loyalty. He had given fully, faithfully, and had been deceived, but that didn't make him weak. It made him real. He spent more time outdoors now. He walked trails alone, letting the wind tug at his coat, letting nature speak where people often lied. He picked up his camera more regularly, not for anyone else, but for himself. It had been years since he'd allowed himself the joy of aimless creativity. His lens captured small things: sunlight catching in a puddle, a hawk gliding overhead, a child laughing as their kite danced in the wind. It was through these quiet frames that Matthew began to piece himself back together. He also reconnected with a few friends he'd unintentionally let drift during the marriage. Without Rachel's social demands shaping their schedule, he realized how isolated he had become. Now, Saturday night sometimes meant playing poker in a friend's garage or trying a new wine bar with coworkers. There was laughter again. Not the polite kind, but the kind that made your ribs hurt. It reminded him that life, even after betrayal, could still be full. His parents visited one weekend, bringing with them homemade chili and that particular brand of love that didn't need many words. His mother hugged him longer than usual. His father sat on the porch with him for over an hour, mostly in silence, until finally saying, "You didn't deserve that, son, but you handled it like a man." Matthew didn't respond, but that night he slept the best he had in months. Rachel, for her part, seemed to fade from the center of their old social circle. Whatever reputation she had built on being the good one had withered under the weight of the truth. People didn't confront her, not directly, but they distanced themselves. The invitations slowed, the praise turned into polite silence. She had gambled on a secret life and lost not only her husband, but the admiration that had once come with his name. Matthew never celebrated her fall. That wasn't his style. He didn't need her to suffer. All he had ever wanted was honesty. And now at least he had it. Not from her, but from the life that remained. In the end, it wasn't revenge that healed him. It was peace. And peace, as it turned out, was the quiet satisfaction of knowing that while someone else had pretended to live a good life, he was now actually building one. For real, and on his own terms.